So your kalme badi lambi, looks like some kind of a European philosopher from his looks. So James has a master's in English from Midwestern State University. He did his postgraduate work in literary theory and rhetoric at State University of New York. Taught for a year at the American University in Baku, Azerbaijan. I didn't know that he has gone all the way to Azerbaijan. Taught for 8 years in a high poverty inner city high school in Oklahoma City. That's why if you talk to him, he has a touch of bohemian lifestyle, Then he taught philosophy and computer science at Norman North High School in Norman. That's the way they live. Coaches the state champion high school ethics ball team of Norman North High School. So last year when I went to visit them, his team has won the competition of all the high schools of the state, and he was representing Oklahoma in sort of the national competition. So he obviously trained the students how to discuss ethics and all those things and have these passionate dialogues. Works with Dr. Nancy Snow, who is a director of the University of Oklahoma Institute for the study of human flourishing to implement virtue in community flourishing projects in communities in Oklahoma. So you could see that he has a touch not only with philosophy, but computer science, but also with social and political issues. And I think the emphasis is that if we teach sort of young children, young teenagers, how to think, how to argue, how to discuss, what are the ethical values. So he has a very sort of a knowledge and experience and wisdom. So I thought it will be interesting for us to hear from him his sort of views about that, because our young generation, we sometimes teach them in blind faith rather than irrational thinking. What is the sort of in a way, the challenge of the modern age, how we can prepare our teenagers for social discourse that is political, that is social, that is religious, that's cultural. So all those issues, so I'm as much looking forward to his presentation. So as I said, you can listen to him, let him talk for 15-20 minutes, as long as he wants to, and then we can have some discussion afterwards, have some kind of a passionate talk like we had with Lubna. So James, why don't you come and share your thoughts with us?
I'm used to speaking in front of people, but I'm not used to microphones.
You can even hold it in your hand.
See.
Sure.
That feels awkward. Does it look awkward? Sure, it looks awkward. I may just give up on the microphone. Can everyone hear me if I just talk?
Yeah.
You can't? All right, you really want me to use the microphone. Oh, okay. All right.
Get used to the awkward.
Get used to it. All right. I'll make peace with it. So, really, I want to start with an obvious rhetorical question, right? Do we want our children to flourish?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. It's a question that sounds silly to even ask. Of course we want our children to flourish. What do we mean by flourishing? What does it mean to flourish? In working with the University of Oklahoma's Institute for the Study of Human Flourishing, they have very specific definitions for this, as I imagine you would imagine they would, right? It's the name of the institution. They define it as really two things, right, that humans need to flourish. One is that a human needs to reach their fullest potential as rational and moral creatures. But that's not all. It sounds like it might be enough, right? I mean, if you reach your fullest potential as a rational and moral human being, that sounds like quite an accomplishment, doesn't it? It sounds like something we all strive to do, and we all have to put a lot of work into. But there's a second part to that. And the second part to that is to live in a healthy community. And that's a big second part. So for instance, as parents, and I imagine many of us are, I am too, you can make a great plan for yourself as a parent, to raise your child to reach their fullest potential as rational and moral human beings. And that's not an easy thing to do. But at least you feel as though you have a shot at that, at least in the beginning. Maybe later on, it turns out to be tougher than you thought. But you feel as though you have some agency there, working with your child. And your child may do great at that. They may grow up really reaching their full potential as a rational and moral human being. But then if they step into a community that is not a healthy community, they step into a community that is not full of other rational and moral human beings, they're not going to flourish. They can only flourish insofar as the community around them is also flourishing. And so we're faced with this dilemma if we take this seriously, and that is, then we have this we do have to worry about the collective raising of all of our children if we want our children to flourish. But I don't think any of us wants to raise everybody else's kids. If you do, you're going to do like I am and become a high school teacher. Right? Or if you even have a lot more talent than I have, you'll become a middle school teacher, because those people do the hard work. Those people do the really hard work. So how do we raise human beings who are going to become fully realized, fully developed, rational and moral human beings? And develop a community full of those people who are ready to really invest themselves, commit themselves, and engage with the rest of the world to continue to develop all of our communities into healthy communities so that we all flourish. I think, and this is just me now, right? But I believe that public schooling has to play a role in that. I don't think we can just allow private institutions to do all that work. It would be great if we could all rely on everyone's natural parenting instincts to instill these things in our children. But I think we're all realists enough to realize that not every parent has those priorities for their children. Aristotle laid out in his Ethics a set of criterion for what he considered virtue, and how he felt as though virtue could be taught to children. And first of all, he did believe it needed to be taught to children, right? He laid out in the Nicomachean Ethics and some of his other work, that he firmly believes that the most virtuous person is going to be literally trained in these behaviors and characteristics between birth and age 7 by parents and or by those whom their parents had hired to do this job specifically with those children. Aristotle also said that people who didn't get this obviously special and privileged training because their parents didn't provide it to them or couldn't provide it to them, that they still had a shot to be virtuous people, but it was going to be a long, hard haul, and they were going to have to put a lot of focused effort into intentionally becoming a virtuous person in order to attain that. I am kind of skipping why do we care about being virtuous. That is a really important talk, right? But I'm just assuming that we can all agree as a warrant for our conversation that virtue matters, right? And there's a lot of different ways we could discuss it, a lot of different synonyms we could use for virtue, civic virtue or civic character or whatever. But there's two specifically that I want to talk about, and then I want to talk about why teaching philosophy in high school with teenagers, and honestly this is also true for teaching younger students in younger grades as well, which I don't have the courage to do, but there are those who do it, I hear, and bless them, and that's wonderful. Really helps kids because it gives them the opportunity to develop especially intellectual virtues that other academic subjects don't lend themselves to anywhere near as easily. So in working with this and doing this and thinking about it, speaking with you about it, I really wanted to focus on just a couple of examples and why I feel like philosophy offers more opportunity than most other academic subjects for students to develop these. Now, one thing I want to make clear is I don't feel like teaching any subject inculcates kids with virtues, right? I don't think they walk out little virtuous robots, right? I don't think virtues are something that you can, unless you're literally dealing with a child who is between the ages of birth and 7, but you really can't inculcate a person with something, right? You can actually shove it down their throats and train them, and they just kind of grow up thinking that's the way it is. But once they're teenagers or preteens, they're a little too old for that. Especially once they're teenagers. Teenagers, for the most part, you can't extrinsically motivate them to do anything anymore. They either want to do it because they found a reason, or they're not going to do it because they haven't found a reason. Right? They're beyond being intimidated into doing something because somebody else has told them to by the time they're 15, 16, and they've got all these insane hormones, running through them. And, they've either found a reason that they want to do this, or they haven't found a reason, and they're going to find something else that they do have a reason to do. So, two intellectual virtues I think are really, really important. One is open-mindedness. Open-mindedness means that number one, you're aware of your own biases. You're aware of the things that you tend to believe about the world, about your own worldview, and that you are able to set that aside when approaching something before you judge it. Right? So open-mindedness is the ability to say, for instance, I was raised an American, I was raised in a Christian household, I like Western art, I read novels, all these things, and so there's a specific worldview that comes along with all that. And even within that, I have my own preferences and my own opinions. But when I'm going to come across something new, I have the ability to set all that aside. Whatever my preferences are, whatever my values are, I'm able to set all that aside and say, okay, I'm not going to bring that to the table when I'm presented with this new thing. I'm going to look at this new thing on its own terms. I'm going to look at it on its own terms to see if I can understand it the way it describes and presents itself. And then judge it. How well does it hold together on its own terms? How well does it make sense within itself? Not according to these criteria I bring to the table with me, but on its own. How can I see beauty in it on its own terms? How does it define beauty for me in a way that maybe I hadn't imagined beauty before? Or how does it present a truth that holds together in a way that I hadn't imagined truth before? Right? And what that allows for is full and complete open inquiry. Because if you bring all of your own biases and all of your own opinions and all of your deep-seated convictions with you to experience new things, then you're going to have deep limitations on your ability to deeply question and explore whatever that new thing is. So open-mindedness is an intellectual virtue, right? And it's not something that we're born able to do, but it can be developed as a character trait. You can develop the ability to do it. So another intellectual virtue, and the only other one that I want to discuss and share with you is called intellectual humility. Intellectual humility is it's best described as when say you're a student and you get an A on a paper, and your instructor gives you the paper back and you've got an A, and at that moment if you have intellectual humility, there are certain things you will not do. You will not brag about how smart you are. You will not talk about how you hardly even worked on it. Right? For the individual who possesses the virtue of intellectual humility, it is not about accolades or awards. Those things actually don't matter to the person. And there are lots of reasons why. It's not because they value the humility, it's because they know that recognition or any kind of recognition or praise from others actually is no part of the process of reaching the goals of intellectual engagement. Does that make sense? It plays no role whatsoever in achieving whatever the intellectual challenges are that you've set before yourself, right? And so if you're genuinely engaged in whatever the intellectual challenge is, you're doing it for the love of doing it. It is intrinsically satisfying to do it. And once you attain those goals are worthy in and of themselves. And any awards or accolades you may or may not get for doing it actually aren't part of the equation. This is why it doesn't surprise me at all, the Nobels were given out recently. It doesn't surprise me at all how I hear the same story over and over. The phone rings for the Nobel recipient, and they pick up the phone and they're like, I had no idea. Well, you know why? Because they're genuinely engaged in the intellectual endeavor, and they're not doing it for an accolade, right? This is almost like the touchstone for genuine intellectual work, is because they're not doing it for an accolade. But this is part of the reason why they're getting an accolade. It's because they're so engaged in the work that they've accomplished amazing things. So intellectual humility is another really important virtue. So what do these have to do with teaching philosophy? Well, in teaching philosophy, it is a subject where I tell my students right away, right off the bat, you are taking this class and you have to expect that your perspective will be challenged by perspectives that we're going to cover in this course. I say, no matter what you come in here thinking, no matter what your schema is, no matter how your vision of the world works, no matter what your background is, I promise you, we're going to cover some kind of an idea, some kind of a thinker in here who you are going to find distasteful, who you are going to disagree with, who you are going to find repugnant. Guaranteed. And so you're going to have this fantastic opportunity to be righteously indignant. But you're not going to be. Because if you jump too quickly on that righteously indignant train, you're not going to understand them. So why do you care about understanding them if you're going to find them offensive? Here's why. Because you're not going to be able to articulately disagree with them if you don't understand them first. Right? You have to understand something first. And to understand it, you have to approach it with an open mind. Because once you can articulate that perspective on its own terms, then you can offer a criticism of how it fails to live up to its promises on its own terms, which is a much more powerful critique than, I just disagree with this because it doesn't sit well with what I already